what I'm going to do today is going to start off with a little bit about Nasstar, who we are, and where we've got to be on a journey with a customer like this, and then we'll get into a sort of a presentation of how we took them along that journey, what the benefits were, how they started out, and how they've ended, and I think it'll give you a real insight into the challenges and the benefits that the customer experienced as we took them through this cloud adoption. So Nasstar basically, our focus is to solve business solutions with our customers using cloud as a first choice. So when we're engaging with customers, we're understanding their problems. We would look at cloud technology as an initial enabler. We understand that the world is out there, has hybrid capabilities as well, but we want to lead with cloud solutions to get those business outcomes. So how we do that? We're 1,100 people strong at the moment and growing. So an organization that's doing about 230 million in turnover in these services. Over 600 technical architects and engineers leading a lot of these engagements with our customers. It's underpinned by two core cloud technologies, and that's AWS and Microsoft. And we've been with them for many years. And not only having experience and accreditation, but having a strong relationship with the hyperscalers is also important to help our customers on their journey of transformation. Some of the customers that we've engaged with there are across public and private sector. So there's a very broad area of experience and capabilities that we've had with customers offering transformation. To give you an idea of what type of services we offer, so we talk about the intelligent connected cloud. So this is just a representation of some of the enabling technologies, enabling services that we offer our customers, but really focused on solving business challenges. Things like recruitment and talent retention. We're all challenged today around getting people into our businesses, giving them the right tools, giving them the right experiences when they're working in their roles. Meeting digital expectations, data is a big thing. And these are all the type of business challenges that we're faced with our customers. We understand those. We then use these technologies or these enablers to try and deliver against those outcomes. The one we're focusing on today typically is modernization journey. So this is typically what we've seen with customers and the experience that we've had as we've sort of moved them from left to right. So it's really assessing their current on-premise or existing position, whether it's initially on cloud or totally on-prem. That analysis is then done. We typically see a simple migrate to cloud, which is maybe a lift and shift or a migration of simple workloads or development environments. And then as they move right, you're getting to the point where you're looking at optimization, moving to serverless environments, and that level of, as we move out, the level of modernization increase, the benefits of adoption and maturity are realized, you're reducing your carbon footprint, and you're building sustainability into your organization. So that journey really is what we're going to be covering today with the Rail Delivery Group, where they went into this process, they realized they were getting the benefits, they pushed forward with that, and ultimately are realizing that today. So I'm going to hand over to Darren, and he'll take you through the real-life opportunity.
Thanks, Wayne. So the Rail Delivery Group are run by the train operating companies who fund them. They're also partially funded by DfT, and they are responsible for standards and shared services that are used across the rail network. Kind of public-facing part of that really are things like national rail inquiries and fares and ticketing, things like that. They will tell you that they have a lot of priorities, but their absolute number one priority is service availability and service resilience, both in terms of, and resilience in terms of how a service will handle losing a component, but also how a service will handle when one of its components experiences a significant amount of load that it's not kind of necessarily expecting. In order to take them on this journey, we put them through a kind of quite a simple cloud adoption framework. We sat down with them, helped them define a strategy based on what their primary objectives were and what measures they would use to make sure that when they started to work through the implementation cycles, they could make sure that they were on track to delivering and getting the value that they needed from the cloud. Alongside the kind of implementation cycles, you've got to have a strong governance and a strong management view, because you want to make sure that you are actually feeding back the measurements and progress you're making against the targets. And everybody's journey to the cloud is really different. For Rail Delivery Group, their focus, because it's all on availability, is the measure was dead easy, right? It's like, is my service up or is it down? So how did they get there? So they started off with infrastructure only. We sat down with them. Their biggest pain point was national rail inquiries, because the amount of traffic that they receive is very, very peaky. So if everything is working normal, it's a busy website. If there's a national rail kind of incident, maybe a bit of flooding that's got kind of significant disruption, the traffic to national rail inquiries, which does much more than journey planning and the kind of public-facing website, is huge. It ramps up. So we sat down, we worked with them to essentially do an infrastructure-only move of that service, and implemented auto-scaling, which worked fabulously for them. So they got some benefit there. Their next kind of step was, okay, so we've moved infrastructure. Can we make more use of the cloud services on offer to solve our resilience issues around component failure or component loading? So we sat down with them and embarked on a program of application modernization. And it was about probably 2 years after we'd done that, we saw a shift in their focus internally in the business, where they were starting to lean on their other suppliers to move to the cloud, because they could see the real benefit that that was bringing to them, and they could see their costs going down, and they were no longer having to worry about their service availability and service resilience. If you talk to them today, everything they do is cloud first. They've started to iterate over all their existing services, both the services that we provide to them and services from other third parties, where they're like, how can you move to containerization or make more use of serverless technologies? And they're just iterating over that journey and those services to just improve their cost profile and their sustainability profile. Wayne, do you want to wrap up?
So what we've seen in these projects is that although the initial engagement may be a compelling event that drives the adoption of cloud, and maybe the initial thing may be a cost-saving exercise, what we've realized with customers is that over time, what they're getting the benefit from is a lot more than just a cost optimization. It's that resiliency, it's that business agility, that ability to be able to compete very effectively against new starters, startups, services in the cloud that just need to be configured because they're just consumable. And so as we've seen that maturity grow, we've seen customers become more invested in cloud adoption. And that's really where we play a role. We walk alongside them. We take the experience that we've garnered in other areas of our engagement with customers and in the market, and we help accelerate that maturity with our customer base. So some of the customers we've touched on Rail Delivery Group, but some of the other customers that we've engaged with are EE, helping them with their future-proof telemetry platform, and as well as Jaguar Land Rover. I had a discussion with a gentleman from Bentley today as well, and they're on a similar journey. And so we're seeing a lot of customers, seeing the benefits, as you can see on the right-hand side, becoming more agile, releasing customer services quickly to their markets, and then of course, using services in the cloud to increase revenues. So that's pretty much, us for today on this. Are there any questions around? Yes.
Have you got any strategies where organisations struggle to rationalise the shift revenue costs or capital costs when adopting cloud?
I'll say it again, sorry.
So one of the barriers to cloud entry
Is the OPEX versus CAPEX.
Correct.
Yeah. No, I think one of the things that we are challenged with cloud adoption is the financial constraints of a business. So, when you're moving to that type of model, having a discussion with procurement is a difficult thing around how they're going to sort of represent those costs. But the strategy part of the engagement really needs to define that up front on how the business is going to deal with this type of model. So to do it afterwards, you're going to hit a barrier all the time, right? So it's really, really important to get that buy-in in the beginning. And then once you've sort of understood what your cost model, your consumption model, your financial model is going to be, configure the platform to be able to inform that and measure that and report on it so that finance is getting comfortable with what's being used in the cloud, how it's been adopted, how it's been utilized. So the biggest fear that we're seeing in a lot of cloud adoption projects is that if it's a consumption-based and we pay for what we use, how do we control that cost? And it's certainly a problem that we've seen where organizations have gone off and got into cloud very quickly without having a proper strategy, without thinking about a proper adoption roadmap and how they're going to sort of manage that journey and control that journey. Then finances become a problem. But it is an OPEX, cost. So I don't think it addresses that problem. Yes?
So obviously, moving into the cloud gives you a concentration risk, potentially, and then the lock-in. How do you address those? So especially to use things like Lambda functions in AWS or serverless components within Azure, because they are cloud, they're Microsoft native or Amazon native functionality, which makes it very difficult to move to cloud providers. How do you address those risks?
So, if you look at the hyperscalers and their ability to provide those services from an uptime perspective, right? The probability of those systems going down is fairly, fairly low. So you've got to take that into consideration. So if you're looking at a 99.999%, that's one way to look at it.
Yeah, tell that to Microsoft with their API gateway that went down for, was about 4 hours.
Yeah.
Took out quite a number of businesses.
Yeah. So like I say, there is always that risk, right, that it could happen. The other option is to have a multi-cloud strategy, but it doesn't address necessarily systems that are being developed around the services that are specific to the vendor.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's always sort of a measure of risk versus benefit. What we are finding a lot of now is that as organizations are maturing and they're understanding the operating model of cloud, they are looking at a multi-vendor strategy, right? Because initially the message was, look, stay with Microsoft or stay with AWS, choose one, because it's very difficult to run an operating model, with one cloud, and now you've got to run it with two. Why would you do that? What we're seeing is as organizations are maturing, as that operating model is evolving, as skills are coming into the business and coming from the market, that ability to share that risk across two platforms is becoming more relevant. But there is that risk. If you're writing your application into services that are native to the cloud, they're going to be there, right? We often have that conversation with the banks, actually, because the banks have a very, very similar situation where they have this problem. And with one of the banks that I dealt with, they chose to put some applications there because the risk was calculated with that vendor as to be lower and some applications in the other, and that's how they mitigated it. Some services you can move across, of course, right? But I understand your point. It's a challenge, yeah. But multi-cloud, I suppose, addresses that in a way, but it does bring in extra costs, extra overhead, extra complexity. Yeah, a good question, yeah.
So I'd just like to add on that risk. And for me, the way I've always approached it, I don't think that's a new risk. If you look at your technology stacks, even on-prem, you're probably tied into Windows Server or some form of SQL or Oracle database or Linux in some cases. So it's ultimately a hosting model, so I don't think the risk changes. I think the location tends to.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you say, dealing with your due diligence up front and getting your strategy right
Yeah.
is very important. But yeah, I think it's something.
I also think the ability to respond to an outage, you know, with Microsoft and AWS, they've got massive resources and abilities and capabilities that they've built in to respond to an outage. Whereas if you're treating it individually as an organization, you know, you depend on your own resources to do that. So, you know, it's like the whole security thing, you know, the fact that Microsoft and AWS have to protect and secure their platform, their ability to secure and understand security has evolved tremendously over the years, right? They've just got better and better at it because that's all they're doing. They're protecting that platform against attacks. So once again, you know, the strategy will define your risk, and you know, your appetite for that risk will define your decision.
Sure.
Sorry.
I just want to touch on modernisation of legacy apps. And I work for a bank, so I know how difficult it can be. So I just wondered if you could share any challenges or any snippets of how you, because some things can't be reviewed, right? And how you go about that with your clients and manage that expectation.
Yeah, you can grab this one because we have a similar situation.
Sure. Okay, so the way I would do it is by focusing on data, because fundamentally you can have as much function as you like, but if you've got no data for that function to operate on, you don't have anything. So I always start with understanding the data flows and the message flows and all of the system interactions at a very high level in terms of what data are they using, because that allows you to start segregating your application or your services up into, essentially you're trying to get to swim lanes of kind of application behavior. But if you have it as if you look at it through a data lens and a kind of, this is common data, this is shared by these things, it makes it easier to spot the interfaces that you can kind of slide off to one side. And it's like, okay, we can block this part of our existing service out, and actually we can drop in maybe an identical API while we then kind of replace it. But we know what data's going in and out of that, so we know how we can make sure that anything else that depends on that data is either localized with that kind of new component or can be synchronized so that the kind of remaining legacy elements that you haven't touched yet are still in sync. You've got to look after the data first. The other challenge is really just about how many separate kind of clients you have around the interfaces and trying to keep the interface the same so they don't have to change. It's not always possible and not always desirable, but the more change you inflict on the consumers of your kind of services and interfaces, the more resistance and pushback that you get. For good reason, because change is painful, and anytime you change anything, you introduce risk. But yeah, so the way I approach it is by essentially data segregation, because you've got to do that first, because your functions need the data to survive.
Finally, it's probably an unfair question, so it's around escrow. So obviously, as we consume more and more things out of the cloud,
Yep.
more of obviously the legacy type things that we've had in the past, there's probably going to be more and more escrow agreements we're taking on board. So how do we kind of mitigate against that cost, and is there a way of perhaps consolidating that?
So my experience, and Wayne, maybe you might want to jump in a minute, but my experience of escrow is all around software. So our requirement for our customer, in this case, it's actually the rail delivery group, where it's like we build the software for them in some cases, not in all cases, but they have strong escrow requirements where we have to deliver kind of snapshots of the code that's deployed, and every time we change it, so they get, you know, full snapshot of all the code, all the documentation, instructions on how to build the whole thing from scratch, you know, the whole kit and caboodle. And every time we make a change, we then have to kind of refresh that. And as an organization, they've weakened their escrow position slightly. So they used to pay for an external audit, and that was how they kind of managed it across all their suppliers. They brought in an external auditor that would make sure that, you know, we were able to build the systems that we deliver to them and provided all the code, all the rest of it. And now what they do is every time we do a release, they basically make sure that we've uploaded all the source code documentation and things like that to an S3 bucket. And they're happy with that. They control access. So the S3 bucket that they control, we have write access to upload stuff, but fundamentally they monitor that. And that's how they manage their escrow for the cloud services, that we put everything in there. So all the Lambda source code and all the rest of it. The hardest part about it is the build instructions. And because internal to kind of Nasstar, you know, we have our own build pipelines and things like that. But actually, when the code's put in escrow, we have to create this is how you build it without access to any of Nasstar services and internal pipelines and things like that.
Any thoughts and tips on how we kind of reduce the cost on that? Potentially I could end up with lots of escrow agreements, which I would pay the software twice, so to speak.
Automation is the only way you can reduce the cost. We're not quite there yet, but we are seriously considering that as part of our release process. We also do the automatic upload of all of the source code and things like that. We keep our documentation and things like that in a kind of common location. It's actually in SharePoint, so we know where it is, so we could just upload all of that. But I think the only way we reduce costs there is just by automating the hell out of it.
Thank you very much.